So I've switched from Windows 11 to Rocky Linux 9.4. Let me tell you about the journey. My name is Niels and you're on Headbrink.dev. I wanted to switch from Windows to Linux for a while now. I hesitated to go through with it, however, due to the fact that some of the apps I'm using, notably the Microsoft 365 suite, as well as Affinity Photo, Designer and Publisher, aren't supported on Linux. Then came Microsoft Recall. So I researched some alternatives to the software I was using at the moment, watched some videos of people detailing their use cases and problems along the way to understand the implication of me fully switching to Linux. After a couple of days, I had a pretty good understanding of what I was getting myself into. A friend of mine had also migrated to Linux not too long ago, and, although he didn't have the exact same use cases as me, he mostly confirmed that using Linux as opposed to Windows didn't really limit him in his day-to-day activities. There was one thing I was worried about though: video editing. As you can tell, one of my requirements is to be able to record video and audio, edit it, and then upload it to YouTube. My tools of choice are OBS Studio for screen recording, Audacity for voiceover, and DaVinci Resolve to edit everything. OBS and Audacity are natively supported on, as far as I know, every major Linux distribution. Great, that's taken care of then. DaVinci Resolve is also supported on Linux, theoretically. A couple of months ago I tried getting it to work on Manjaro, no luck. So I was a bit skeptical if the transition would really be that seamless. Nevertheless, I prepared a spreadsheet listing the apps I'm currently using on Windows and one or two potential alternatives I'd be willing to switch to if the app isn't supported natively. I was also very strict in my evaluation. Pass or fail for an app was decided based on 3 criteria. First, if the app has native Linux support. Second, if I was able to install and run the app using the official documentation. Third, if the app immediately informed me, through dialogues for example, that dependencies are missing and the app worked immediately after installing those dependencies. Only if all 3 were true, the app would pass. I'm not willing to hunt down forum entries from years ago, scour through obscure tutorials or config files to get an app working. The setup needed to work as described by the publisher in the official documentation. Some notable alternatives I considered included switching from Microsoft 365 to Proton. This was planned regardless of me switching to Linux, so it didn't really affect my choice too much. Inkscape, Krita, Photopea or Canva as a replacement for the Affinity suite, and LibreOffice and OnlyOffice as a replacement for Word, Excel and PowerPoint. Armed with the list of apps, I now needed a list of distributions I wanted to test. Mostly due to personal preference and recommendations from people online, I ended up with Manjaro, Fedora, Rocky Linux and Zorin OS. If possible, I avoided GNOME in favor of KDE, purely based on personal preference. I ended up choosing Rocky Linux because it scored highest across those 4, tied with Zorin. Then the day came. I backed up my files, wiped my drive and booted into the Rocky Linux installer. Everything was working well. As I wanted to record as much of the setup process as possible for YouTube, my priority was getting OBS working first. After that, it was onto the NVIDIA drivers. I first used the run file you can download from NVIDIA's website to install the drivers. This generally worked fine except for some warning messages during the installer, mostly to do with the open source graphics driver Nuvo being active and having to be disabled before proceeding. Once the installer was finished, I rebooted and got stuck on a black screen with a blinking cursor. You can switch to another TTY session using Ctrl-Alt-F1-2-3, so my system may have been recoverable without a reset, but I didn't know that, so I had to reset. Second attempt, no recording this time. My idea was get it working, once you're sure how it works, reset again and record it. Same problem. I tried the minimal Rocky installer, which will, as the name suggests, only install the minimal amount of packages needed to run a basic system. No desktop environment or anything else. Same problem. I tried the official NVIDIA documentation, checked if I missed anything, switched from the run file install to a package-based install. Same problem. The driver itself seemed to be working. The NVIDIA SMI command didn't show any warnings or errors. But I had tracked down that the problem happens immediately after starting SDDM, the display manager. So I checked the log messages using journal control and found something about Wayland? That was interesting because in my research I found that NVIDIA's latest drivers are supposed to support Wayland, but maybe not. So I edited the SDDM configuration file and switched from Wayland to X11. System control restart SDDM, and there it was, my login screen. Awesome, that was the first hurdle taken care of. It took longer than I would have hoped, but I'm not complaining. Now I at least know the underbelly of Linux display managers and desktop environments. FYI, when you're setting up your desktop environment packages, don't forget to include the relevant terminal or console package for your distribution. Now we can get started. Let's install OBS so I can record the next steps. I've also noticed that OBS Studio installed through Flatpak will install different dependent packages if your graphics driver is Nuvo or NVIDIA. If you installed OBS Studio before installing the NVIDIA drivers and get an error message about OpenGL when launching, try removing the Flatpak and installing it again. It should install the packages for NVIDIA as well in that case. As Pipewire only works with Wayland, I'm choosing Display Capture XSHM as my source. Black preview screen. Okay, that's not great. I won't take you through all of the debugging I did. Just know that I'm using an ultra-wide display, 3440 by 1440, which is working fine for my normal work, but not as great for recording. That's why I like to switch to regular 2K, 2560 by 1440, while recording my screen. When using the native resolution of my screen, OBS can pick up the recording without problems. That's not great. Recording in ultra-wide 2K will result in me having to do more editing to crop the relevant content to 16 by 9 for YouTube. I also suspect that this may result in a loss of quality. If I want to record in 16 by 9 directly, I found that configuring the NVIDIA X server to output 1920 by 1080 does work with OBS, but again there will be a loss of quality. I haven't decided which way to go yet, as there is a more pressing issue: file sizes. Due to the fact that DaVinci Resolve only supports a limited set of video codecs on Linux compared to Windows and macOS, I can't just record MKV encoded with H.264 anymore. I tried both DNx HD and Motion JPEG, which work with DaVinci Resolve out of the box, which is great, but result in astronomical file sizes even for short recordings. And to get close to usable quality, the bitrate has to be very high, which in turn increases the file size even more. For Motion JPEG, I had to use greater than 100 megabits per second to get a recording with reasonable quality. And even then it's not close to what I was getting before using H.264 encoded MKV. And DNx HD only works for Full HD. Given that I could record 2K, that's also not the greatest solution. So what are the options? Well, I could bite the bullet and buy DaVinci Resolve Studio, or accept the lower quality and large file sizes, or switch to another video editor. To be honest, I'm not sure yet. Let me know if you have any suggestions or experience with similar setups. I appreciate any comments. So what's the verdict? Overall, everything is working as expected. I tried to follow official documentation instead of third-party tutorials or guides as much as possible, which worked very well in my opinion, especially for NVIDIA. Most of my use cases worked out of the box. The only two, let's say, specialities were the limited video codec supported by DaVinci Resolve and the fact that I have an ultra-wide monitor which messed with OBS. Otherwise, I'm quite happy with the setup. And of course, due to the fact that it's Linux, everything is customizable. Linux has come a long way over the last couple of years. I remember installing it for the first time and struggling quite a bit because of limited hard and software support. Installing it in 2024, I have to say the experience was significantly better. Not perfect, but a lot of apps are supported now. You don't have to dig into config files as much to fix obscure issues. Overall, it seems much more well-rounded. I would not call it intuitive or beginner-friendly yet. If you stray from basic, mostly browser-based use cases, you may still need to go forum diving or use your phone-a-friend lifeline. I guess being a software engineer by trade helped me getting the system up and running quite a lot. Someone who isn't very technical may miss the opinionated user interface and experience that macOS or Windows bring. But I appreciate privacy. And while achieving 100% privacy may be inconvenient and time-consuming, switching to an operating system that doesn't spy on you sounds like a good start to me. Until next time.